Hey parents, back today with you. Sorry I missed last week, but wanted to be as consistent as I can with these and keep you in the loop as to of what I'm saying to your kids. Also reminding you and just trying to keep this in front of myself and in front of you that I feel like the Lord is raising up an army, and so the things that I have to say to them are in alignment with that, that they are young warriors of the Lord, spiritual warriors who God's raising up. Um, and what I'm seeing is that God is aiming himself at families. That's Malachi 4, 5, and 6, through fathers and mothers, because we both have a role. And as we come together in as one, those roles come into play. But through fathers, because he's a father coming through the family unit, and he's raising us all up. So not only is he raising up your children, he's raising up his children through you, parents, as he's raising you up. So you and I have got to take this very seriously and become this ourselves. And as we are becoming this ourselves, then we can in turn around and be the same type of parent that God is to us to our kids. And so he's the one we imitate. Imitate is what Ephesians says. Imitate God. And so as he fathers us, we father our children. And he's raising up warriors in our day and spiritual warriors. So David comes into focus. David is the key figure for the New Testament warring church. He was a man born out of his time. He lived a New Testament life, basically lived a New Testament life in an Old Testament dispensation. He was a king and a priest. You weren't supposed to do those things. I've talked about this before, but David was a prototype of a believer today. And we've talked about how he had those five anointings. I think it was five, but those anointings that we went over, that's in First Samuel 16, when Samuel anointed him to be the future king. He received some anointings that just amplified his heart that was already bent towards God. And those being, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but the big one is anointed worshiper. His eyes were anointed to see God, and he saw God in everything. I mean, just think about this, guys. Whenever you get discouraged about where the world is, if God wanted to, and we need to seek him for this, because I do believe he's going to do these types of things, but he could peel back the world as it is, peel back the curtain to the eyes of our heart, and we could see him in such a way that it would completely melt us down and recalibrate our every desire and purpose. He's so powerful and so magnificent and so overwhelming that if he just gave us a taste of who he is, it changes everything. It's a game changer. And he holds that ace, that card anytime he wants to lay that thing down. And so that's what he did with David. He showed David who he was as father, and father came and began to father David and again, that's another New Testament thing there, because father really did father David like he will you and I in this New Testament dispensation, this side of Christ. If you study the life of Christ, and especially through the book of John, you're going to see Jesus revealing the Father and revealing the fact that he's being fathered by the Father. And he's saying, hey, you can be fathered by the same Father. And he's trying to make that extraordinarily clear for everybody. And even after his resurrection, he's telling his disciples, okay, guys, I'm the bridge, but what you want is the Father. Come to the Father the same way you saw me doing it. Now you do it. And see, that's the opportunity that we've got. We've got a Father coming to us, and he wants to open up our eyes and help us to see him in the same way that David saw him, or similar, maybe even greater, because that changes everything. It just simply changes everything. And so David is a prototype there. The power of his life influenced. I mean, just think about it. How much has David's life influenced the world? next to Jesus, of course, and some other people, but we're talking about the way that he lived, and that being a model for us to ask the Lord, do it again, Lord. Through the testimony of David in Scripture, David is the one person with more passages of Scripture on his life, both the inside and the outside and every other side. We get an enormous amount of insight into this man's life, this broken man's life, who just had his heart anointed to see God, and he was fathered by God. God was really in his face, fathering him. Just like you got your kids in your space, God came into David's space and began to father. I mean, your impact on your kids at home, fathers, is amazing. That's things that I'm trying to learn myself right now. I'm trying to really lean into play and fun, and also disciplines, that we just raise the level and that I engage them. These are things I struggle with big time, but I'm committed to it because I see the Father doing it, and he's doing it through me. And so now he says, hey, turn around and do it to these that I've given you, because I want to raise them up. So yeah, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but let me stop and get into what I was going to talk about today, or what I talked about last night, I should say. The guy's life, this guy's name is Benaiah. And I remembered Benaiah from a study I did several years ago, and he caught my eye because of what his name means. Benaiah means built by God. It's a powerful name, a powerful meaning, Benaiah. And we find him in David's mighty men. So this is the Gibberim. The Hebrew name for David's mighty men is the Gibberim. I love that name. I just want to use it. But I love the Gibberim because the Gibberim represent everything my heart desires, which is a team of warriors. It's a group of people. They've been through something. They've been loyal. They've been followers, dedicated followers. They've done the hard stuff, man. They were following when it wasn't cool to follow. The Gibberim are the ones that went out and met David when he was running from Saul. Okay, so this is after he became a national hero, which actually is the thing that got him on the map, which actually caused this to happen. After Saul's jealousy and his demonic oppression got to a certain degree, David had to take off and leave, and he's running for his life. And when he went out to the cave of Adullam, I'll just go ahead and read you this passage just to give you some groundwork on to Benaiah. 1 Samuel 22, 1 and 2 says, David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him, and everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. So you're talking about, and this is what we talked about last night. I tried to put it on their level in terms of, kids that in school, you'll have certain kids that just can't make it. They're struggling personally, they're struggling academically, they're struggling did I say emotionally? They're struggling. They just can't seem to get with the program and make it work, and sometimes they come and they go, and our kids get to witness that. They get to see this certain kid struggle hardcore. He can't get along with it. He can't obey. He just is out of it. That's the Gibberim. Okay, that's the Gibberim, the mighty men of David. That's where they were when they ran to David. Okay, now they ran to David because it wasn't working for them in society, and they were looking for somebody to lead them. And here's this guy, this national hero. He's like the man's man, taking out giants, and them hearing the stories and hearing the songs sung about him, and all of that, the mystique around David. When they heard that he's out in the desert somewhere, they're like, hey, that's my shot. I got nothing going on here. There's some hope in my heart to run out and try to find this guy. Now, so that's what we know about. Now, I want a full disclosure here. I haven't done a full study of this from A to Z in terms of the mighty men that were chosen, the 30 mighty men that were around him. And there's other lists too about the mighty men. That's not just 30, but although it lists 30, there's another one in First Chronicles or Second Chronicles with 47 of them. But David had a group of men, let's say, of about 50 or less in different ranks, but these guys were serious. I mean, we're talking about the Navy SEALs of David's day, serious warriors who had personal loyalty to David because they'd been through some stuff with David. Okay, this was a rough bunch of people. Okay, so I've tried to tell it to the kids this way that it's those kids that come and go and that struggle and that you've seen, that's the kind of person, except they're grown-ups. They just can't get it together. They can't make it in society, and they're the ones that rushed out to David, about 400 of them. And it's in that list of 400 that this mighty men emerge out of that. Okay, now what the full disclosure is that I don't know that to the letter every single one of them did that, but according to what I've read through the scripture, at least most of them were at a time in their life when they were younger not doing well at all, and they ran out to David, and David captained, he mentored them, he fathered them. As he was being fathered, he fathered them and shaped their lives, changed their lives. And these were rough guys. This was not the people you would have chosen to mentor or father. These are the troublemakers. These are the most difficult people you can imagine. So it really shows to David's capacity, his ability, the type of person that he was, and what God was teaching him, even as those people were attracted to him. God the Father saying, okay, next lesson, David, I want you to take these misfits and turn them into the greatest warriors the planet's ever seen. And I'm sure David was like, oh, thanks, God. I appreciate that. Maybe he didn't do that, but difficult people are difficult. And David was already in a bind. Anyway, I keep on talking too much. But let's get to Benaiah. So Benaiah was built by God. And in the list here in 2 Samuel 23 that talks about him, it gives us some clues about him. And that's what I read to the kids last night. So Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel who had done many deeds. Then it gives a list of his mighty deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. He also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. And he had killed an Egyptian, a spectacular man, meaning he was huge. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand, so he went down to him with a staff, wrestled the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed him with his own spear. So this is like Benaiah is the real deal, and he's like a highlight reel of warriors, something that we'd see on the movie screens these days. But the thing that caught my attention about him was this issue of the lion-like thing. Okay, so you got the 2 lion-like warriors from Moab, and it makes me wonder. I haven't studied this in depth, but the enemy is depicted as a lion, a toothless lion. If you go back to Cain, the first time we really see a picture of, is that the first time? It's one of the first times, if not the first. But you get a picture, and there's a law of, no, it's not the first time, because he was in the garden as a snake. So to Cain, he appeared as a lion-like being, and I've heard in the Hebrew that gets even more gross, that it was almost a sexual predator type spirit. And it's a spirit being, okay, but just throwing in there this sexual predator that is crouching, so that the wording in the Hebrew gives a picture of a lion-like spiritual being who wants to reproduce, is going to pounce upon and take over a human, which is the warning to us all, because he definitely is that. He's a predator. He works off of deception and intimidation and steals, kills, and destroys. As much as you'll give him, he'll take it and more. We see that picture again, and Peter gives us a picture of the enemy as a toothless lion, seeking whom he may devour. So that's a spiritual picture that we see throughout Scripture. And these two Moabite warriors were lion-like, and so I wonder what that means exactly. But then you have the next passage there where you find out this Benaiah is the type of guy that would chase down a lion. Okay, he doesn't have a gun. He can't get to a certain range and kill the thing. He's going hand to hand, or hand to paw, I should say, with this lion. I'm sure. Does it say he's got a spear? No, it doesn't say he's got a spear. He may have, but still, you got to get on top of something to kill it with a weapon like a spear or a sword. That'll tell you what kind of guy you're talking about. Okay, this is not normal. Again, and why? The question is, why would Benaiah do that? Now, of course, we could think it through practically, and maybe the lion was causing trouble in town, killed some children or something. I don't know, and it had to be done, and he's like, "I'll do it." It doesn't matter why he did it exactly in terms of practicality. But the thing that comes up to me in that is it reminds me of Peter walking on water, because this gets into an issue of discipleship. Because we in the West, modern day, we don't know what discipleship is. In first century, a first century Jew, their idea of discipleship was completely different than ours, and we're the ones that are wrong, by the way. We think in terms of intellectual knowledge. That's what we think of. So we go to a math teacher and we want the math teacher to teach us math. What she or he knows about math, that's what we want to know intellectually. That's not biblical discipleship. Biblical discipleship is, I want to be just like the rabbi. So if I see the rabbi doing something, I'm going to do that, because that's the entire point. I won't go too far off into this, but in that day, a rabbi said he would call disciples. Jesus wasn't the only one that did this. This was something that was done by every rabbi. And in Jewish culture, that's the thing you wanted above and beyond all things. But you had to get through a bunch of schools that were like tryout type of a thing. Can you cut it type of thing that would you elevate to the next level to even become a person who could even be chosen. So this was a huge deal to be chosen by a rabbi, to follow him and to become like him. And a rabbi wouldn't even choose a disciple that he didn't seriously believe could make him look good. So in other words, most rabbis were like, yeah, I'm going to find the very best I can find, the brightest, the sharpest, the best looking, the everything, whatever. Probably not best looking, but you know what I mean. They want their pupils to make them look good. And the yoke that they carried, was their teaching, their interpretation of Torah. It's the same thing as our denominations today. Everybody has a different view on your yoke was your teaching. So I'm getting way too far. I'm sorry I do this. But anyway, interesting stuff. There it is to me. They would want to be just like their rabbi. So when Peter, that was one of the questions, is why would Peter think to walk on the water? If you see Jesus walking on the water, if you see anybody walking on the water, your first thought probably is not, hey, I can do that too. If he can do it, I can do it. You're just going to be in amazement as he's walking. But Peter sees Jesus walking. That's his rabbi. What that signals to Peter and to the rest of the disciples is that if Jesus is doing that, I'm supposed to do that, because I'm supposed to be just like my rabbi. That is the mentality of a first century disciple. Now we've lost that in the West because we separate the head from the heart, and Greek thinking and what our influences and how we think. We think it's all about intellect, and it's obviously not. God's after the heart, and we're one in that sense, and he wants us to be just like him. That's what the Father's doing. He's raising us up to be just like Jesus. And I like David because Jesus is Jesus, that's a tough call there. But David is screwed up. He's a human. And look what God did through him. So I like looking at David's life. We get to see all his frailties, all his failures. And so back to this discipleship mentality. Benaiah was discipled by David. And what did David kill early on in his life? A lion and a bear. See, so I don't know if Benaiah didn't mention he went and found a bear too, but I'm wondering, did Benaiah just go find that lion to kill it just so he could be like his father, David, his mentor, the one who had trained him up and gotten him? Now, here's another interesting thing about Benaiah. And again, this is why I don't know exactly. I'd hate to tell this wrong, but Benaiah, so from what I found out about Benaiah, it says here that he was the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel. So that gives you a little bit of a clue that his dad was a big shot in Kabzeel. And from what I have read, he was a chief priest. I don't know if he's the chief priest like in Jerusalem or if each city had their own chief priest. I'm not sure how that worked, but he was a big deal, in other words, because the chief priest is like top dog in Jewish culture. There isn't anything higher. So his dad was a chief priest, and that makes me wonder, was he just not able to pull it off? I can imagine if you're the son of a chief priest, in Jewish culture, you better walk the line. You better have gotten it figured out. You better be making him look good. You better be into what he's into. I'm just imagining here. But maybe Benaiah just couldn't hack it. Maybe he had such a maybe his dad was a real jackleg. And who knows what turned him off and what got him sideways. But he got sideways, potentially. Again, maybe he had a great relationship and he hooked up with David later, but I feel like it's unlikely because what David had around him while he was king were these mighty men. These are the guys that had been with him from the beginning. Okay, these are guys that he had deep loyalty from and trust with. In fact, you'll hear, one of the stories in this kind of Hall of Fame of David's last words was, those two that when they were running from Saul, David just made a passing desire of, I wish I had some water from that well outside of Jerusalem. And these two guys broke through enemy lines to go get him a cup of water and bring it back. And, David dumped it out, and you can read that. But that was two of his mighty men. Of course, if they're going to do something like that when David was running for his life, what do you think they'll do for him when he's the king of Israel? So see, David had this insulation around him and these men that he'd been through the trenches with. They were with him when he was nothing. And he shaped them, man. He showed them the type of man that he really was. And this is like George Washington. And back in the Revolutionary War, he's my favorite president we had because of the warrior leader that he was and the type of loyalty that he gained from the people that watched him do what he did, the type of bravery that he displayed, the type of loyalty that he showed to the cause and to everything. He's just a high quality human being, and men want to be like men like that. And that's the way that David was. And so I believe that Benaiah just, for whatever reason, he couldn't hack it in his upbringing. And he's one of those guys that just ejected. He said, I'm out of here, man. I'm out of here. And probably had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because his chief priest dad was, probably saying, you're going to be nothing. I'm just making this stuff. I don't know. Anyway, he's out there and he's like, I'm going to walk with God. I'm going to find my way. I'm going to be, and he ends up being this incredible warrior. And by the way, Benaiah goes on from his duties with David, and he's with him through thick and thin, through Hebron to Jerusalem, through the whole deal with Absalom, and then through the power struggle after when David was dying and trying to bring up the new king. There was a Adonijah that tried to work his way in there and take the kingdom, and David had already said Solomon's going to be that. Benaiah made sure, he was one of those warriors that made sure that transfer took place from David to Solomon, and then he was Solomon's number one guy. He was like he continued to serve through the reign of Solomon in these golden years. So God used this guy in a powerful way, very needed. All these mighty men were, and again, the idea of the mighty men speaks to my heart more than anything in Scripture. To be a part of a band of brothers that do this significant of a thing around someone like David in the midst of the call of God on a nation, man, that really speaks to me. And that's what I want that same thing to speak to our children, to raise them up in this. Hey guys, y'all are together in this. This is your brother. We've got to train them up like Navy SEALs do, that we are in this together. There is no doing this alone. And really, guys, we got to talk about this to our kids and the friendships that they're working on and gaining, and we need to encourage them in those types of things. I mean, we're all we've got. I mean, the enemy is going to do his level best to stop that from happening, and he already is. We can't just let him do that. We've got to understand what it is we're stewarding and how we're shaping our kids and what they think about and treat their brothers and sisters that are in the family of God, because we're called to a family of God that's higher than blood. That's what Scripture teaches. So Benaiah, let's get back to this and I'll wrap it up real quick. I brought in 1 Corinthians 1 because this is the real issue with the mighty men. So in other words, you're talking about the mighty men. We know where they ended up. They ended up doing valiant things for a very important man of God named David. Okay, David he raised them up. He trained them with the heart of God, with those anointings on his life. He led with those anointings, and those anointings shaped these men around him in the things that they did in the journey. They became mighty men because David was a mighty man who followed a mighty God. You all see that coming down? That's what we're looking at here. We have the same opportunity. It's the same Father. It's the same Spirit. It's the same. We have access to it. Just lean into it, get configured that way, get aligned underneath it, and do the same things. So these mighty men who became mighty, they didn't start out mighty. They started out total screw-ups. I mean, they were the rejects of society who came out to David. And see, that's significant because whether you come from a great family or a not so great family or anything in between, the prerequisite here is this verse in 1 Corinthians 1:27. The prerequisite, before I read it, is you're powerless. You're broken and you're powerless. And you come to the Lord with faith, broken, that what Christ did can redeem everything that you're not. That you give yourself to Him and you become a brand new being with a new heart, with a new way, with a new Father who is literally fathering you intimately in every way, moment by moment through the day. He's leading you into who He knows you are. What He's written on your heart, He's bringing that out. He's filling you with His qualities, His values, His everything, His passions. And we're just walking that out. But it begins with this understanding of I'm broken. I need God desperately. I can do nothing apart from Him. That's the prerequisite. And that's what the Gibberim came to David with, this understanding that I've got nothing. You're my only hope. And so train me, teach me, show me. I'll follow you. Not my way, but show me the way. That mentality. And that's what 1 Corinthians 1:27-28 says. Let's see here. That God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised, God has chosen. And the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are. So that's what God uses. He uses weak and broken people who know that and who come to Him with that weakness and that brokenness so that he can fill them with himself. In the 12 steps, step 1 is you're powerless. Step 2 is but Jesus Christ has come, and he will restore you to wholeness, to newness of life. But see, you got to cash in on step 1 before you can cash in on step 2. And then you got to learn after that how to walk out the rest of the steps, because that's the backside of the gospel. That's the power of the gospel, are making those steps. And those steps are actions that you've got to live out. And one of those is opening up yourself to other people and becoming a brother and a sister who has no darkness in him. You have no secrets. You're not hiding anything. You've got all your shame out on the table. Say, here it is, look at it. I'm seriously messed up, but God is changing me through that admission. And I'm doing that before you. Pray for me. Pray for me in this area, in that area. Pray for me in this weakness, in that weakness. Pray for me. And let me pray for you. See, we're the Gibberim. We've got to be this. We've got to model this for our children. There is no other way. There's no other shot. This is the way, period. So parents, I'm just speaking this into your heart from sincerity in mind. In the years that I've been seeking the Lord and following, this is clear as a bell to me. God has a way, and there's only one way. And you either find it or you don't. And we've got to find it, and we've got to live in it, and we've got to teach it to our children that they do the same thing as early as possible. And we can. So continue to know that what I'm doing is I'm trying to stir up, teach, and stir up these things in them. If this is written on their hearts, I believe it is. So we're just wanting the voice of the Lord to bring it to life and to call it up. And so just pray with me about that remember Ezekiel 37, we're prophesying over the bones. We're prophesying over our kids. We're prophesying over ourselves and over our church. Father, bring forth life. May the Spirit of God bring forth life. Raise up this warrior generation. Raise them up, Father. Anoint our eyes to see you so that we respond to you differently than we ever have before. Completely transform this generation is what we're believing for. We believe. We know we're weak. We look around us and see the weakness and the powerlessness. Yep, step 1, I'm powerless, but Jesus has come. And I'm speaking the promise. I'm declaring the promise. I'm demanding that the promise come to me. And that's something else I can talk about maybe in another video, but the Lord's Prayer is an act of war. It is a demand. We're not demanding God. This is God's plan. We're demanding that the enemy get out of the way of what God has sent and is sending. And so we command that the life of God come to our children. We command that the word of the Lord stir their hearts. We command that this army rise up, that the enemy get out of the way, and that these truths come to us so that it changes everything. And again, we're not demanding God. How foolish would that be? We're demanding that this second heaven that the prince of the power of the air is the prince of get out of the way, because we have an authority that's greater. We have a kingdom of heaven that's coming to the earth, and we are the stewards of it. We're the gateways of it. It's by promise and covenant that's already been settled. So focus on the promise, and bless you guys. We'll talk to you again here soon. Bye-bye.